My mom slapped me for speaking. He laughed like it was a game. That moment shattered everything I thought I understood about who I was and who I could become. I stood there at the kitchen table in my childhood home, chest tight, and tea spilling from my trembling hand, feeling more stripped than I ever had. Not for what I said, but for daring to believe that my words mattered. The room reverberated with the slam of her hand, not just against my cheek, but against every spark of strength I had tried to nurture. It struck not as discipline, but as dismissal, a declaration that my voice didn't belong. My brother chuckled as if I had tripped on an invisible line, and my father's eyes hardened. They looked at me not as their daughter, but as someone who had taken too much space. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch again. I simply realized that returning here after all these years of silence was a test I wasn't prepared to lose. I had come hoping for a truce, or maybe a hint that love could change. Instead, I was reminded that in this house, power had always been built on fear, not forgiveness. I pressed my fingertips to the cheek that still throbbed and whispered to myself, "You are not theirs anymore." That slap was not the final word. It was the first page of my story the moment I stopped hoping to be seen and decided to write myself instead. I refused to let that hand define me. And in that refusal, I found a clarity no apology could ever deliver. I turned and left that kitchen, and that version of me behind. What happened next was not about revenge. It was about response, and I was finally ready to ask myself who I would choose to become. My name is Evelyn Monroe. I'm 32 years old, a data analyst living in Seattle, Washington. On paper, I'm successful college graduate, stable career, decent apartment overlooking the Puget Sound. My coworkers call me reliable. My neighbors say I'm quiet but polite. What they don't know is that silence was trained into me like a second language. I didn't grow up learning how to speak. I grew up learning how not to. Every sentence at home had to be edited in real time, tone, checked content, sanitized body posture corrected. My mother, Lucille, was a woman of performance. Hair always styled, voice, always soft when the world was watching. But when it was just us, her whispers cut deeper than screams. My father, Roy, a retired police officer, believed in order more than understanding. And my brother, Logan, 2 years older, followed their lead like it was gospel. I was the youngest, the only girl, the one expected to be quiet, helpful, and unremarkable. I complied. I made straight A's, folded laundry without being asked, and avoided eye contact when the air grew thick. But compliance never guaranteed safety. The more I bent, the more they demanded. By my teens, I had developed stress-induced migraines and clenching jaw pain that no dentist could explain. I told myself I was just sensitive, just dramatic, just too much. It wasn't until I left for college at 18 on a partial scholarship out of state that I began to experience air that didn't smell like tension. In those first few months away, I would still pause before entering a room, half expecting an accusation. But slowly, my body unlearned survival. I began to speak more, think freely, and even laugh without guilt. I thought I had escaped. For over a decade, I limited contact, just holiday visits and the occasional text thread. Until a call came from Logan 3 months ago. "Mom's been sick. You should come home." I didn't ask for details. I booked the flight, packed a small suitcase, and told myself I could manage a weekend. I thought maybe illness had softened them. Maybe the years had humbled something. But when I arrived, I realized nothing had changed except me. And that change, however quiet, was seen as betrayal. In their eyes, I wasn't the good girl anymore. I was disruptive, mouthy, selfish. The slap came not from a place of rage, but ritual, a correction, a reminder. And the laugh from my brother wasn't cruelty, it was tradition. My father's sentence was the final punctuation: "You deserved worse." They believed that. They still do. But I don't. And that difference, that fracture, is what this story is about. Not the slap, but what it set into motion. The unraveling, the reclaiming, the act of becoming. I wasn't born with a loud voice, but I've spent years sharpening it slowly, privately, deliberately. And now I'm ready to use it. Not to scream, not to beg, but to document, to deliver, to define myself in my own language, no longer afraid of who might try to silence me. It happened on a Sunday, one of those gray, drizzling Seattle afternoons that never fully wakes up. I had been back at my childhood home for less than 24 hours, and already the walls felt like they were breathing down my neck. My mother had insisted I attend church with them. For appearances, she said. People talk if they don't see you. I sat through the sermon like a mannequin, nodding when appropriate, smiling tightly during hymns. Logan sat beside me, elbow resting casually on the pew, tapping his foot like the whole thing bored him. Afterward, we returned to the house. My mother changed into her silk robe. My father retreated to his recliner. I offered to help in the kitchen, not out of habit, but to keep busy. She watched me slice apples in silence. Then it started. The insinuations. "You've gained weight, Evelyn. I barely recognized you at the airport." I paused. "I haven't really," I said carefully. "I think it's just the sweater." She raised one eyebrow. "Defensive already?" I looked down. I didn't mean. "There it is again," she snapped. That tone, always the victim. My fingers tightened around the knife. Logan walked in, grabbed a soda from the fridge, and leaned against the counter. "Y'all arguing already?" He smirked. I turned toward him. "I'm not arguing." My mother's voice went cold. "Don't raise your voice at your brother. I wasn't." And then she hit me. It wasn't hard, it wasn't cinematic, it was precise, rehearsed a palm to the cheek like punctuation. Logan burst out laughing. "Classic Evelyn." And my father from the doorway said, without looking up from his phone, "You deserved worse." I stood there, the sting blooming across my face, not because of pain but recognition. This wasn't new. This was a rerun. But I wasn't who I used to be. I didn't apologize. I didn't cry. I just set the knife down, walked out of the kitchen, and closed the door to my old room behind me. I didn't speak for the rest of the day. I didn't eat dinner. I just lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, remembering how many nights I'd done the same as a teenager. I thought about the friends who had never been invited over the birthdays, celebrated in silence, the college brochures I hid under my mattress. I thought about every time I'd tried to speak and been told I was too much, too dramatic, too loud, too emotional. But mostly I thought about how none of them saw anything wrong. To them, it was normal, expected, deserved. But not this time. This time I wrote it down. Date, time, who said what, how it happened. I wasn't going to let it dissolve into doubt. I opened my laptop, created a folder called Receipts, and began to collect. Not because I planned anything, not yet, but because for the first time in my life I wanted evidence. Not for court, for myself, so that when they gaslit me again, I'd have proof I wasn't imagining it. Proof that it happened. That night, as the rain tapped the window and the house settled into silence, I knew something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't going to survive this visit. I was going to expose it. And not just for revenge, for clarity, for closure, for the girl I used to be who thought silence was safety. The days that followed were a slow unraveling. I stayed 2 more nights, mostly in silence, playing the role they were used to. I didn't bring up the slap. I didn't question the laughter. I simply observed. The house was cleaner than I remembered, but the energy was the same, sterile, performative, controlled. Every interaction with my mother was coded in condescension. She offered me tea like a queen offering poison. "You still drink herbal, right? Or are you one of those oat milk types now?" My father remained emotionally unavailable, like always. When I asked how retirement had been treating him, he said, "Quieter without you around." Logan never missed a chance to belittle me. "Bet you're still single," he said one afternoon while scrolling on his phone. All that brain, no man to use it on. I didn't answer. I was too busy listening, cataloging, recording, documenting. Each evening after they went to bed, I'd sit cross-legged on the floor and type everything into my laptop. Conversations, tone, expressions. I time-stamped each entry. I added old memories that resurfaced, like the time they canceled my school play performance because I had a bad attitude, or the summer they left me alone for 3 days with no food while they took Logan to a baseball camp. I hadn't realized how much I remembered until I started writing. Trauma has a way of organizing itself when it's finally given permission to speak. By the end of the second night, the receipts folder had subfolders: past incidents, current abuse, medical neglect, witnesses' statements. I even added a scanned copy of an old report card my mom once ripped up in front of me for getting a B in gym. I called a friend back in Seattle, Natalie, and told her what happened. She was quiet at first, then said, "This isn't just dysfunction, this is abuse." I laughed bitterly. "It doesn't feel like enough to call it that." "Because they trained you to downplay it," she replied. "Evelyn, this is real. And it's not okay." That night, I found an old voicemail on my phone from Logan dated 3 years ago. He'd been drunk rambling about how mom had lost it again, and how he'd never want a wife like her. I saved it to the folder. I was building a case not for court, but for truth. I began researching adult child emancipation, emotional abuse, and gaslighting. I read stories on forums where women described nearly identical families smiling in public, destructive in private. My hands shook when I realized just how textbook it all was. And yet I'd spent years believing I was the problem. My final morning there, I packed early. My mother stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom, arms crossed. "Running off again?" she asked, voice syrupy. I zipped my suitcase slowly. "I have work tomorrow," she scoffed. "Of course. Can't waste any time proving how superior you are." I stood. "I never said I was. You didn't have to. Everything about you screams ungrateful." I met her eyes. "No. Everything about me screams finally done pretending." She blinked but didn't flinch. "You'll regret this tone one day." I smiled. That's what the old version of me would have said too. Downstairs, my father didn't look up from his paper. Logan didn't say goodbye. I stepped into the rain, let it fall on my face for a moment, and exhaled. In the Uber to the airport, I opened my laptop again and typed 3 words into a new document. "This ends now." Back in Seattle, everything felt louder. The city noise, the buzz of my office, even the way my own thoughts bounced around my apartment. I couldn't focus. Not fully. At work, I answered emails on autopilot. In meetings, I smiled and nodded while my mind replayed the slap, the laughter, the dismissive tone in my father's voice. I started having headaches, dull, persistent, like my body was trying to get my attention. One night after waking from a dream where I was a child again, begging to be believed, I sat up in bed and made a decision. I wasn't just going to move on, I was going to speak up. Not to them, to the world. To people like me who'd been told they were too sensitive, too dramatic, too difficult. I reached out to Natalie again. She worked in legal advocacy and had once helped a former classmate navigate workplace harassment. "You think what I have is enough?" I asked. "You have more than enough," she said. "You've got a timeline, records corroborating messages. This isn't just about emotional abuse, it's obstruction, suppression, and a pattern." She introduced me to Ria, a civil rights attorney in her firm. Ria was quiet, precise, and asked the kind of questions that made me realize I'd buried even more than I thought. "When was the first time they dismissed your pain?" she asked during our first meeting. I answered too quickly. "I don't know." "That's a memory block," she said. "We'll dig through that together." Over the next few weeks, we built a real case, not for revenge, but for accountability. I handed over the folder. Ria called it impeccable. My documentation had been so detailed that she said she could see the emotional progression, how the gaslighting escalated, how the minimization became violence, how they manipulated perceptions through public appearances. She explained that adults rarely bring civil claims against family unless there's significant evidence. "You've crossed that threshold," she said. "And if they retaliate, we'll be ready." At the same time, I started writing a long-form essay for a women's mental health blog. I titled it, "She Hit Me for Speaking." It wasn't just a retelling, it was an unpacking of silence, legacy, trauma, and the lies families tell to preserve control. The editor cried when she read it. "This will help so many people," she told me. Within a week of publishing it, had over 120,000 views. Comments poured in from women of all ages, some thanking me, others sharing stories eerily similar to mine. A nurse from Illinois wrote, "Reading this helped me understand why I haven't called my mom in 6 years." A 62-year-old teacher wrote, "Your story gave me permission to stop excusing my sister's abuse. Every time I read a new message, I felt something inside me realign. I wasn't alone. I never had been. I was just the first to say it out loud." Then came the email from Logan. Subject line, "What the hell? No greeting. No concern. Just a threat masked as disbelief." Can't believe you'd air our family's dirty laundry like that. Hope your little blog stunt was worth it. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Ria. This is valuable, she said. It shows intimidation. Then one morning, a certified letter arrived at my door. It was from my mother. No apology, no remorse, just a single page claiming defamation, demanding I retract the article or face reputational consequences. I smiled, not because it wasn't painful, it was, but because she just proved everything I'd written. I sent it to Ria. She just gave you the green light, she said. We move forward. That night I stood in my tiny kitchen watching pasta boil and realized I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry, but more than that I was awake. The kind of awake you can't undo. I was done hiding. That week I met with Ria and her team to finalize the first round of legal filings. Our claim wasn't criminal, but civil targeting, emotional distress, reputational harm, and obstruction of access to care, all backed by a stack of evidence that would be hard to dismiss. Meanwhile, the story kept spreading. A mental health podcast reached out. Then a nonprofit advocating for adult survivors of family trauma invited me to speak on their panel. Each time I told my story, it came out a little clearer, a little stronger. But it also stirred up the past. I started getting anonymous messages, emails without names, comments on the article calling me a liar, a family traitor. Some had details that only someone close to me could know. Ria warned me. They're trying to make you doubt yourself again. Don't let them. I didn't. But I started locking my door twice, checking over my shoulder walking home. Then on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I received a voicemail that stopped me cold. It was my father. This needs to stop. You don't want to escalate things further. We can talk this out like adults privately. The tone was calm, rehearsed. It was the same voice he used when talking to supervisors back when he was still on the force. I didn't delete the message. I saved it, sent it to Ria. Let them talk, she said. They're building your case for you. The next day, a package arrived with no return address. Inside, a bundle of old family photos, most of them of me as a child, smiling, sitting on Santa's lap, holding a spelling bee ribbon. On top was a post-it note. You had a good childhood. Don't rewrite it. My hands shook. This was gaslighting in its purest form, not just denial, but curated nostalgia used as a weapon. I placed the note in a plastic sleeve, labeled it, and added it to the file. That weekend, the nonprofit panel went live. I spoke for 20 minutes, sharing not just what happened, but how it shaped me, how silence trains you to question your own reality, how speaking becomes a radical act of self-rescue. The clip went viral, over 500,000 views in 3 days. Messages flooded in again, but this time from professionals, therapists, advocates, even doctors. One wrote, "I've treated women like you and never knew how much they were minimizing. Your voice is changing how I listen." I forwarded that one to Ria. She replied, "This is bigger than a lawsuit. You're creating precedent." Meanwhile, Logan posted a vague Facebook status. Not everything you read is true. Some people will do anything for attention. It got dozens of likes from family members, former classmates, and even old teachers. I didn't engage. I didn't need to. My truth wasn't on trial. It was on record. Then came the media request. A journalist from a reputable outlet emailed saying she'd been following my story and wanted to feature it anonymously or publicly. "You're helping redefine what family justice can look like," she wrote. I took a day to think, then replied, "Let's do it." But I keep control over the framing. The article went live 2 weeks later, titled, "The Price of Silence, One Woman's Fight Against Familial Abuse and Gaslighting." It included quotes from my essay, blurred childhood photos, and legal commentary from Ria about the challenges adult survivors face in court. The piece ended with a line I had written, "Just because they fed you doesn't mean they never starved you." It trended on Twitter for 48 hours. And then, the most unexpected email of all, one from my cousin Anna, who I hadn't spoken to in years. She wrote, "I saw the article. I believe you. It wasn't just you. I have stories too." That message cracked something open, not just for me, but for her, for others. My story wasn't a single strike of lightning, it was a signal fire. And people were finally stepping out of the dark. The call came one morning while I was reviewing final edits for an op-ed I'd been asked to contribute to a mental health magazine. It was the hospital my mother had been admitted overnight after a minor fall. Nothing life-threatening, just enough to make them call the next of kin. And apparently that was still me. I hesitated. Ria had told me I wasn't legally obligated to respond. But there was a pull, not of guilt, not of duty, but of unfinished business. So I went. Not for her. For closure. The hospital was quiet, the kind of sterile that makes every step echo too loudly. Room 403. I pushed the door open slowly. She was propped up against a pillow, her silver hair slightly out of place, the teveau in her arm, eyes tired but sharp the moment they landed on me. "I didn't expect you," she said flatly. I didn't respond. I just pulled a chair closer to the bed, sat and let the silence breathe between us. She was the first to fill it. "You've embarrassed this family," she said, voice low. "What you've done going public legal action? You've made us look like monsters." I stared at her, then said calmly, "You did that part yourself." Her jaw tightened. "You were always so dramatic, always needing more." I didn't flinch. "And you always needed me quiet." She turned her face to the wall. "You think you're strong now because of lawyers and attention. But strength isn't about making noise. It's about carrying on." I stood up. "No, strength is refusing to carry what was never mine. You gave me shame and silence and called it survival. I'm done carrying that." She didn't reply, just stared at the window as if the conversation hadn't happened. I reached into my bag, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it on the bedside table. "That's a formal notice from my attorney. You'll be receiving a court summons." I didn't come here to forgive. I came to inform. As I turned to leave, she spoke again, softer this time. "You really believe all of it, don't you?" "That we were abusive." I paused at the door. "I don't need to believe, I remember. And now so will everyone else." I didn't wait for her response. I walked out step by step, lighter with every stride. Outside, the sky had that strange post-rain glow, washed clean, but not yet bright. I breathed it in like a promise. That night I sat down to write. Not another statement, not another article. Just a letter. To myself. To the girl who had once flinched at raised voices, who had edited her personality to survive family dinners, who had convinced herself that being loved meant being quiet. I wrote, "You didn't imagine it. You didn't exaggerate. You endured. And now you are rewriting the ending." I sealed the letter, tucked it in the same drawer as my lawsuit documents, and felt for the first time in years peace. Not the peace of resolution, but of reclamation. I hadn't healed everything, but I had stopped the bleeding, and that was enough for now. 2 weeks after that hospital visit, I received an email from a publishing house in Boston. They had read my op-ed and wanted to speak about a book deal. Not a tell-all memoir, but a collection of essays on reclaiming voice, redefining strength, and navigating adulthood after psychological abuse. I reread the email twice, then 3 more times, letting the weight of it settle in slowly. This wasn't just attention. This was validation, direction, acknowledgement that my voice now held value. I called Ria that evening. She was quiet for a moment, then simply said, "I hope you know what you've done here is bigger than a court case." And I did. The lawsuit was ongoing. My lawyer Daniel had informed me that we had enough evidence not only for personal damages, but potentially for triggering an inquiry into historical medical negligence due to suppressed care records. But for the first time, the legal process didn't consume my every thought. I had started sleeping through the night. I'd begun taking walks again sometimes, with no destination at all. I even signed up for a pottery class on Sunday mornings, a small act of creation after so many years of damage. One Saturday, I visited an old bookstore in town and found a weathered copy of Audre Lorde's The Cancer Journals. I sat on the floor between the aisles and read for over an hour, tears forming quietly. There was something deeply healing about words that didn't flinch, stories that didn't beg to be palatable. I realized that's what I wanted my writing to be: unapologetically raw, clean, not of pain, but of false packaging. Meanwhile, online support grew. Women, especially those 50 and older, began messaging me, sharing their stories in long paragraphs. Some were daughters like me. Others were mothers who admitted their mistakes and thanked me for helping them see what their children had never said aloud. One message stayed with me. It came from a woman named Janice67 who wrote, "I used to believe my daughter was just moody. Now I see she was afraid. Your story helped me call her and apologize. For the first time in 10 years, we talked like people again." I printed that message and pinned it above my desk. Not to gloat, to remember. I'd started something, even if quietly. And that meant something. On the home front, things had shifted. Logan, perhaps sensing the walls closing in, reached out once. A short text, "Hope you're happy tearing everyone down." I didn't respond. My silence wasn't petty. It was purposeful. I no longer played defense in a game I never agreed to. My parents, through their attorney, filed a counterclaim suggesting intentional emotional distress. Our response included recordings, screenshots, signed affidavits. My lawyer smiled dryly and said, "They won't win, but they're trying to stain the process, not stop it." And I understood. This was their pattern, controlling the frame, not the facts. But this time I was holding the pen, and I wasn't writing their version. I spent afternoons outlining the book using the same notebook I'd once used to document symptoms. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same tool I'd used to survive was now the tool I'd use to thrive. I wrote chapters with titles like "Polite Violence," "The Myth of Family First," and "You Are Not Too Sensitive." Every word was a small rebellion, every page a step forward. One evening, while drinking tea on my small balcony, I looked out at the city skyline and whispered to no one in particular, "I made it." Not perfectly, not cleanly, but I had made it through the worst parts. I had stopped apologizing for existing. I had stopped explaining why I hurt. I had started living, not just enduring, and that, more than any lawsuit or publication, was the real victory. 6 months later, the settlement was finalized. There was no courtroom, no judge's gavel, just a quiet agreement signed behind polished conference room doors. My attorney shook my hand, handed me a printed copy, and said, "This doesn't erase what happened, but it puts the power back in your hands." And he was right. The financial settlement covered not just the therapy and medical bills, but also the entire cost of launching a program I had only dared to dream about, a nonprofit initiative called Quiet No More. The mission was simple: supporting adults who had experienced long-term family-based emotional abuse, but had never found a name for it, let alone support. I rented a modest 2-room space in the Arts District, painted the walls sunflower yellow, and opened the doors quietly with a single printed sign: "You are not imagining it. Come in." The first week, 3 women came. One was 64, one was 29, the third was 72. Each told a story I recognized in my bones. Each wept not from pain, but from the relief of not being alone. That's when I knew this was what I was meant to do. Not just write the truth, build a space where truth didn't feel like a threat. Meanwhile, the book moved forward. The title was "I Wasn't Being Dramatic: How They Silenced Me and How I Spoke Anyway." It wasn't designed to be a bestseller. It was designed to be found by the people who needed it. I recorded the audiobook myself, and on the final page I left a note. If you're reading this and you've ever been told you're too sensitive, to too much, or that you shouldn't talk about family like that, this book is for you. You're not broken. They were just loud. The reviews came in slowly, some glowing, some furious. A man claiming to be an uncle figure from my past wrote a blog post calling me a liar. I didn't respond. My silence wasn't surrender. It was protection. Nor reached out on the day of the book launch. She had just started college. I made the dean's list, she wrote. "I think it's because I stopped pretending to be okay. Thank you for teaching me that." I cried that night. Not because of pain, but because I had become the woman I needed when I was 15. Strong, calm, clear. One afternoon, I returned to the place it all began, my parents' house. Not to knock, not to speak. Just to stand across the street, hands tucked in my coat pockets, and remember. The windows were the same. The ivy still curled along the left side of the porch, but I no longer needed anything from inside. Not validation, not apology, not love. Closure. It turned out didn't live there. It lived in the life I built without them. As I turned to leave, I passed a woman walking a small golden retriever. She smiled and said, "You look peaceful." And for the first time, I believed it. Because I was. Because the slap that once tried to erase me had become the starting point for everything I reclaimed. My voice, my worth, my name. I no longer flinched at kindness. I no longer braced for betrayal. I simply lived, loudly, quietly, fully. I had the receipts, I had the truth, and I had myself. That was more than survival, that was freedom.